The woman in the rearview mirror, Route 66, Arizona. It happened in the summer of 2017, along a lonely stretch of Route 66 between Flagstaff and Kingman, Arizona. The sun had long set, and the only thing lighting the cracked asphalt was the rhythmic flash of the truck's headlights. Thomas Reed, a long-haul truck driver with 20 years on the road, had made that same route countless times. It was supposed to be just another night, another delivery. He was alone in the cab, the radio low, the hum of the engine steady, until he saw her. At first, it was only a faint reflection in the rearview mirror, a pale blur behind him. He rubbed his eyes, assuming fatigue was playing tricks on him. The desert had a way of distorting things at night. Shadows looked like people, rocks turned into faces. But then, in the next flash of headlights, he saw her clearly. A woman, sitting upright on the back seat of the truck's cabin. Long, wet hair clung to her face. Her eyes were wide open. She wasn't moving. Thomas jerked the wheel in panic, swerving slightly before steadying himself. The road was empty, silent. His breath came fast. "You're tired," he muttered to himself. "Just the dark playing games." He kept his eyes on the road ahead, refusing to look again. But the feeling of being watched was unbearable. After a mile, he glanced in the mirror once more. She was closer. Her face now visible under the weak interior light, skin white as dust, lips pale blue. Thomas froze. His throat tightened as a chill spread down his spine. He blinked, and in that single instant, her head tilted slightly, as if she was studying him. He could almost hear the faint sound of water dripping. He slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a stop. His heart hammered against his ribs. He turned around, nothing. The back seat was empty. The air was cold, too cold for the desert night. A faint scent of damp soil lingered. Thomas stepped out of the truck, flashlight in hand. The desert stretched endlessly around him, no lights, no cars, just wind and sand. He opened the rear door, expecting to find maybe some lost item that had fallen behind the seat, something to explain it. But the upholstery was wet. Not spilled water, wet, as if someone had been sitting there soaked through. He got back into the truck, locked the doors, and started driving again. He tried to call his wife, but there was no signal. The road seemed to go on forever, mile after mile of darkness. Then, the radio flickered. Static. A woman's voice broke through the noise for just a second, soft, almost a whisper. "Don't stop again." Thomas threw the radio switch off. His hands were trembling. He gripped the wheel tighter. The mirror now showed nothing but the faint outline of the cabin behind him. Yet every few minutes, he felt the pressure shift, like someone leaning forward slightly from the back seat. By the time he reached the next truck stop, dawn was beginning to break. He pulled over, shaking, exhausted, desperate for light and people. The attendant, a heavy-set man with gray stubble, noticed his pale face and asked if he was all right. Thomas just nodded, ordered coffee, and sat by the window. After a few minutes, he worked up the courage to ask, "Anyone ever see strange things on this stretch?" The man looked up slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "You mean the woman?" Thomas froze. "What woman?" The attendant's voice dropped. "Happened about 5 years ago. Young lady broke down in a storm, right around mile marker 217. Tried to wave someone down. Truck hit her. Driver never stopped. Folks say she still flags down trucks on rainy nights. Some say she gets in." Thomas didn't answer. His mouth had gone dry. When he finished his coffee and walked back to the truck, the morning sun was full and bright. He felt foolish for being afraid. He opened the driver's door and climbed in, and stopped. On the passenger seat, there was a small, wet footprint. Bare, delicate, clearly made by a woman's foot. The seat belt beside it was buckled. He stared at it for a long time, then started the engine and pulled back onto the road. The radio stayed off the rest of the way to Los Angeles. Every time he caught a glimpse of the rearview mirror, he flinched, but it stayed empty. When he reached his delivery site, he checked the cab once more. It was dry. The footprint was gone. He told no one. For months afterward, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in that truck. Sometimes, while driving through long, silent stretches of highway, he would smell wet earth again. Sometimes the rearview mirror would tilt slightly, though he never touched it. Once, on a foggy night, the mirror cracked on its own. He replaced it the next morning, but the reflection was never quite right again. He retired 2 years later. When asked why, he would only say, because sometimes the road looks back. The end. Mile marker 223, Texas Interstate. It happened in late October of 2019, along Interstate 40, just outside Amarillo, Texas. The highway stretched endlessly through the flat plains, broken only by gas stations and the occasional flicker of a distant farmhouse light. It was cold, the kind of night where the wind seemed to whisper across the asphalt. 2 college friends, Daniel Foster and Eric Malone, were driving back to Albuquerque after visiting Daniel's parents in Dallas. They left late, wanting to beat the morning traffic. Around 1:30 a.m., the highway was nearly empty. The world outside their headlights was just black fields and scattered brush, the radio humming softly in the background. The road markers flashed by 219, 220, 221, when suddenly, Daniel spotted the faint glow of hazard lights up ahead. A pickup truck was pulled over on the shoulder near mile marker 223, one headlight shattered, its driver's door open. Daniel slowed the car. "Probably someone needs help," he said. Eric frowned. "Man, this is Texas at night. People get robbed like this. Just keep going." But Daniel pulled over anyway, easing onto the shoulder. As they approached, a man stepped out from the shadow of the truck. He was in his 40s, wearing a red plaid shirt, jeans, and dusty work boots. His face was pale in the headlights, his hands trembling slightly as he waved. "Hey! Sorry to bother you," the man said, his voice strained. "My truck broke down, engine just died on me. I've been out here for hours. Can you help me out?" Daniel rolled down his window halfway. "You okay, sir? Want us to call someone?" The man nodded, breathing heavily. No. I've already called. Tow truck's on its way. Could you do me one favor?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "My wife's number. I just need her to know I'm okay. Tell her John's fine. Please. Her name's Mary. She'll be worried sick." The way he said it, calm, polite, desperate, made it hard to refuse. Daniel took the note through the crack in the window. "We'll call her when we get into town." The man smiled weakly, nodding. "Thank you. God bless you boys." They drove off. Glancing back once, the man stood in the same spot, waving as their taillights disappeared into the dark. After 10 miles, Eric sighed. "I told you not to stop for strangers." Daniel chuckled nervously. He looked normal. "I mean, what if it was your dad stuck out here?" They drove on in silence. When they finally reached Amarillo, they pulled into a 24-hour diner to call the number. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, overheard them as they asked for a phone. "You boys okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just helping some guy back at mile 223, Daniel said. "He gave us this note for his wife. Said his truck broke down." The woman's face changed instantly. Her expression tightened. "What did you say?" Daniel repeated it slowly. The waitress wiped her hands on her apron. "Honey, I don't know who you think you talked to, but that man's been dead for a week." Daniel froze. "What do you mean?" She leaned on the counter, lowering her voice. "His name was John Tiller. He died out on that stretch last Friday night. Pickup truck hit a deer, flipped off the road, caught fire. They found his body in the driver's seat the next morning. Tow crew said his lights were still blinking." Eric laughed nervously. No. We saw him. He was alive. He talked to us. The woman just shook her head. That man's wife comes by every day. Brings flowers to the wreck. Daniel's hand trembled as he unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat and old-fashioned. It said, "Tell Mary I'm fine. Tell her I'm finally coming home." Beneath it was a small, smudged fingerprint, black, like soot. The waitress's eyes widened. That's his handwriting. The paper looks the same as the notes she leaves on his cross by the road. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "You're joking." "I wish I was," she said quietly. They left the diner without finishing their coffee. The highway back toward their motel seemed endless. When Daniel opened the glove compartment to put the note away, it was gone. Just a faint trace of ash remained on the plastic. The next morning, they decided to drive back to the spot, maybe to convince themselves it had been a misunderstanding. The mile markers passed by again, 221, 222, 223. The shoulder was empty, but the dirt showed deep tire marks and something else, a blackened patch of asphalt, circular, as if from an old fire. Nearby, by the guardrail, stood a wooden cross with faded white paint. Written across it, John Tiller, 1975 to 2019. Beloved husband. There were flowers, mostly dried. And one fresh note pinned beneath them. Daniel leaned in and froze. It was the same handwriting. The same black smudge at the corner. The note read, "Someone finally told me you were fine. Thank you." Daniel and Eric stared at each other, speechless. They got back in the car, neither of them talking for miles. The desert sun burned high and bright, but Daniel couldn't shake the chill that crawled up his spine. He turned on the radio, it was all static. That night, at their motel in Albuquerque, Daniel dreamed of the road again. The pickup's hazard lights blinking in the dark. The man standing beside it, waiting. When he woke up, his phone was glowing on the nightstand. One new message. No number. Just text. "Thank you for stopping." The phone flickered, then went black. He tried to tell himself it was some sick prank, maybe a wrong number, but deep down, he knew. 2 weeks later, Daniel passed mile 223 again while heading home for Thanksgiving. He drove in silence, eyes fixed straight ahead. But as the road curved slightly left, something caught his eye, the faint flash of hazard lights in the distance. His stomach dropped. As he drew closer, he saw the same pickup, the same broken headlight. And standing beside it, the same man, waving. Daniel didn't slow down. He didn't look in the mirror. When he reached Amarillo, his hands were shaking. He pulled over, breathing hard. On the passenger seat lay a folded note that hadn't been there before. It said, "You forgot to tell her I was fine." The letters were wet, ink bleeding slightly, as if written by trembling hands. He left the note at a rest stop that night and drove without stopping until morning. He swore he'd never take that highway again. But sometimes, when the weather turns cold and the wind hums against the car doors, he still dreams of that stretch of road, and of a man standing alone at mile marker 223, waiting for someone to carry his last words home. The end. The last gas station, Nevada desert. It happened in July of 2016, on a forgotten stretch of U.S. Highway 50, often called the loneliest road in America. The night air over the Nevada desert was dry and thin, the kind that carries sound for miles but hides everything beyond the reach of the headlights. Jacob Morales, a delivery driver hauling electrical supplies from Reno to Ely, had been on the road for hours. His fuel gauge hovered near empty, and his GPS had lost signal miles ago. The desert around him was nothing but endless black, with no towns, no traffic, not even a single porch light in sight. Around 2:15 a.m., a faint glow appeared ahead, a small building, a sign swaying in the wind, Jack Service Station. The neon letters buzzed weakly. The place looked half abandoned, but the pumps were still standing, and a single bulb glowed above the door. Jacob exhaled with relief and pulled in. The gravel crunched under his tires. The air was strangely still when he stepped out. He expected the desert wind, but it was silent. Not even the hum of insects. The lights from his truck cast long, uneven shadows across the cracked pavement. He walked to the pump and lifted the nozzle. It worked, surprisingly. The smell of old fuel filled the air. From inside the small shop came the sound of a bell, as if someone had opened the door. A man appeared in the doorway, wearing a dark mechanic's jumpsuit. He looked to be in his late 60s, with leathery skin and eyes that seemed too pale for the dim light. "Evening," the man said in a gravelly voice. Jacob nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Evening. Thought I was running out of luck. Didn't think anyone was still open this late." "Always open," the man replied. "You're lucky you stopped. Not a good night to be on this road." Jacob frowned slightly. "Why's that?" The old man didn't answer right away. He just looked past Jacob toward the dark highway. "Things happen out there when the moon's down. Best you don't stop till sunrise." Jacob chuckled uneasily. "You mean coyotes or people?" The man's eyes didn't move from the road. "Neither." Jacob tried to lighten the mood. "Well, I just need a full tank and some caffeine, and I'll be fine." The man nodded and disappeared inside. The pump clicked as it filled. The air felt heavier now, as if the night itself had thickened. Jacob looked around, the building, the broken vending machine, the old payphone by the door, everything looked frozen in time, like it hadn't been touched in decades. The man returned with a steaming cup of coffee. "No charge," he said, handing it over. Jacob took it, grateful. "Thanks, sir. You live out here alone?" The man smiled faintly. "Not for a long time." The words hung strangely in the air. Jacob wasn't sure how to respond. He nodded, put the cap back on his tank, and checked the gauge. Full. Before he climbed back into the truck, the man added quietly, "Keep your lights on high. Don't pull over. No matter what you see." Jacob laughed nervously. "Got it. No ghost stories tonight." The man didn't smile. "It's not a story." Jacob started the engine. The man watched him pull onto the road, still standing under the flickering bulb. The last thing Jacob saw in his mirror was the old man's figure shrinking into darkness. For the first few miles, nothing happened. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, black and smooth, no signs, no lights. Then, in the distance, a pair of headlights appeared behind him. Jacob checked his mirror, the lights were bright and steady, like another car catching up. He felt relieved. At least he wasn't alone on this road anymore. But after 20 minutes, the headlights hadn't changed distance. They stayed exactly the same, neither closer nor farther. Perfectly aligned behind him, following every curve, every hill. He slowed down a little. The lights slowed too. He sped up to 80. The lights matched him exactly. The old man's words echoed in his mind, "Don't pull over. No matter what you see." Jacob gripped the wheel tighter, trying to ignore the goosebumps crawling up his arms. Maybe it was some local tailgating him, maybe just another traveler. But something felt wrong. The lights were too bright, too white, almost colorless. They didn't flicker over bumps. They didn't reflect on the road. They were just there. He rolled down the window slightly, hoping to hear the sound of another engine. There was nothing. Only the wind against the cabin and the hum of his own tires. Another 10 minutes passed. The road dipped slightly downhill, and he caught a glimpse of the desert to his right, flat, endless, empty. When he looked back in the mirror, the lights were gone. Just gone. He let out a shaky laugh. Maybe it was his imagination. Maybe exhaustion. He turned the radio on to break the silence, static. Every channel. He turned it off again. Then, as he crested the next hill, the headlights reappeared, not behind him this time, but ahead, on the side of the road. A wrecked car. Burned out, rusted, surrounded by blackened sand. And standing beside it, a figure in a dark jumpsuit, motionless, facing the highway. Jacob's stomach dropped. He hit the brakes before realizing what he'd done. The truck slowed, skidding slightly on the gravel shoulder. The figure didn't move. He tried to blink it away, but it stayed. He slammed the gear and drove past, refusing to look again. But as he glanced in his mirror, just for a split second, he saw something that made his hands tremble. The figure had turned. And the headlights behind him were back, blinding, impossibly close. Jacob floored the gas pedal. The engine roared. The speedometer climbed past 90. The lights stayed right on his tail. He shouted, terrified, praying for a town, a gas station, anything. But there was nothing, just endless road and burning light. Then, just as suddenly, the lights vanished. The road was empty again. His chest heaved as he slowed down, heart pounding in his ears. He forced himself to breathe, to think. Maybe it was a hallucination, maybe a reflection from his own headlights on the desert sand. At dawn, he finally saw another gas station, modern, bright, filled with cars and people. He pulled in, shaking, exhausted. The clerk, a young woman, gave him a curious look. "You all right, sir? You look pale." He nodded, still catching his breath. "Yeah, I just saw a place last night. Jack's service station. Old guy helped me out. You know it?" The woman blinked. "Jack's? Sir, that place burned down 30 years ago. Out on Highway 50, right?" He stared at her. "What?" "Yeah," she continued. "My granddad used to talk about it. Said a mechanic fell asleep while fixing a generator. Whole station went up in flames. He didn't make it." Jacob stepped back. His coffee cup, the one the old man had given him, was still in the holder. He picked it up slowly. The cup was blackened on the bottom, the paper soft and singed, as if it had been near fire. The woman tilted her head. "You sure you didn't stop at one of those ghost tour places? People try to find where it used to be." Jacob didn't answer. He set the cup down and walked outside. The sun was high now, the desert stretching endlessly in every direction. He looked at the road leading east, empty, quiet, shimmering in the heat. He started the truck and drove off. The air was calm, the sky a clean blue. He told himself to forget, to move on. But when he looked into the rearview mirror one last time, he saw something that froze him to his seat. Far behind, barely visible in the haze, stood a single glowing light, flickering, as if from a gas station sign. He blinked, and it was gone. The end. The Crying Girl by the Bridge, Kentucky Highway. It happened in November of 2015, along Highway 79, just outside of Bowling Green, Kentucky. The sky was dark and heavy with mist, the kind that blurs the edges of the road and makes headlights look like dim candles in a fog. The air smelled of wet leaves and river water. Jason Miller, a 38-year-old electrician heading home from a late shift, was driving through the back roads to save time. It was almost midnight when he reached the narrow steel bridge that crossed the Green River, an old bridge locals said should have been replaced decades ago. Jason had driven that route a dozen times before, but that night felt different. The fog was so thick he could barely see beyond the hood of his car. He slowed down to 20 miles an hour and leaned forward over the wheel. That's when he saw her. A small figure stood at the far end of the bridge, motionless, barely visible in the haze. As his headlights swept over her, he saw it was a girl, maybe 12 or 13, wearing a pale blue dress soaked to the knees. Her hair clung to her face, dripping water onto the road. She was barefoot, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Jason braked hard and rolled down the window. "Hey! Are you okay?" The girl didn't move. He pulled the car closer, stopping a few feet away. Her shoulders were shaking, and he realized she was crying. The sound was faint, a quiet, rhythmic sob that barely rose above the whisper of the wind. Jason got out of the car, keeping the headlights pointed at her. "You lost? Where are your parents?" She didn't answer. Her head turned slowly toward him, and in that moment, Jason felt something in his chest tighten. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her lips were trembling. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft it barely carried through the fog. "I can't find my home." Jason swallowed hard. "Where do you live? I can take you there." The girl hesitated, then pointed down the road behind her, toward the other side of the bridge. Across the river. Jason looked at the water below. The river moved sluggishly, dark and deep. "All right," he said gently. "Come on, I'll drive you. You'll catch your death out here." She nodded slowly and walked toward the car. Her bare feet made no sound on the wet pavement. When she reached the passenger side, Jason leaned over and opened the door. She climbed in silently, still hugging herself. The air in the car grew cold, and Jason's breath fogged the windshield. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to sound calm. "Lily," she whispered. "Okay, Lily. I'm Jason. We'll get you home, all right?" She nodded once. They drove across the bridge in silence. Jason turned on the heater, but the air coming from the vents stayed cool. He tried not to look at her directly, something about her stillness made his stomach twist. After a few minutes, Lily spoke again. "You're kind. Not everyone stops anymore." Jason glanced at her. "Well, I couldn't just leave you there. It's freezing." "My mother said someone would stop one day," she said softly. "Someone kind." Jason smiled awkwardly. "Well, your mom sounds smart. Where's your house, sweetheart?" She pointed ahead again, to a small dirt road veering off the main highway. "There." Jason turned onto it. The trees closed in around them, and the fog thickened. He could barely see more than 10 feet ahead. The road wound down toward the river again. After another minute, Lily whispered, "You can stop here." Jason slowed to a stop. The headlights illuminated the remains of an old wooden gate, half-rotted and covered in vines. Beyond it, he could see nothing but darkness. "This where you live?" he asked, frowning. She turned toward him for the first time since getting in. Her eyes were glassy, reflecting the dashboard light. "Thank you for bringing me home," she said. Jason nodded uncertainly. "You sure someone's here? You want me to walk you up?" She shook her head. "No. They're waiting." He hesitated, then smiled. "All right. You take care of yourself, okay?" She smiled faintly. "I will now." She opened the door and stepped out. Jason leaned over to close it, but before he could, she was gone, vanished into the fog. He blinked, squinting into the darkness, but there was no sign of her. Just the sound of the river and the whisper of the wind. He waited a few minutes, but when she didn't reappear, he sighed and turned the car around. As he pulled back onto the highway, he glanced at the passenger seat. It was dry. Completely dry. A shiver ran through him. He shook his head, trying to rationalize it. Maybe she'd been standing on the bridge for only a few minutes, not long enough to soak through. Maybe she'd run off faster than he thought. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, still unsettled, he drove back to the bridge in daylight. The fog was gone, and the air was bright and still. There was no sign of the girl, no footprints, no wet marks, nothing. But on the railing, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A small blue ribbon, knotted tightly around the rusted metal. He picked it up carefully. It was frayed, but fresh, not weathered, not faded. He pocketed it and drove into town. At a diner near the highway, he asked the waitress if she'd heard of a missing girl named Lily. The woman's smile faded. "You mean Lily Carter?" she asked. Jason nodded. "She died out there," the waitress said quietly. "Back in '97. Car went off the bridge during a storm. Her mom tried to save her, but they both drowned. Locals say sometimes people see her, a little girl in a blue dress, crying for home." Jason's hands trembled around his coffee mug. "I talked to her," he said, almost whispering. "She was real." The waitress shook her head. "Everyone says that. A trucker saw her last year too. He quit driving after that. Jason didn't reply. He drove back to the bridge one last time before sunset. The air was colder now, the wind sharp. He stood by the railing where he'd found the ribbon. The water below was calm, reflecting the orange sky. He whispered into the wind, "You made it home, Lily." Something cold brushed against his cheek, like a small, wet hand. He turned around. No one was there. That night, as he sat in his living room, he noticed the blue ribbon again. It was lying on the table where he'd left it, but now it was damp. He placed it in a drawer and never took that road again. But sometimes, when rain falls hard against his windows, he hears faint sobbing outside, and he swears he can see the outline of a small figure by the trees, waiting to cross. The end. The Hitchhiker in the Rain, Oregon Coast. It happened in late February of 2021, along Highway 101, a winding stretch of road that hugs the Oregon coastline. The rain had been relentless that night, sheets of water slashing sideways across the windshield, wipers struggling to keep up. The ocean roared somewhere to the left of the highway, hidden in the darkness. The road was empty, the world reduced to black sky, wet pavement, and the rhythmic pounding of rain against metal. Aaron Collins, a 42-year-old paramedic from Eugene, was driving home from a medical conference in Astoria. It was nearly midnight. He'd been on the road for hours and hadn't seen another car in miles. His headlights cut through the rain in narrow, trembling beams, catching glimpses of wet pine trees and road signs blurred by water. Then he saw her. At first, she was just a shape in the rain, a pale blur by the guardrail, one arm raised. As he drew closer, the figure became clearer. A woman, standing alone in the storm, her white coat plastered to her body, long dark hair dripping over her face. She was shivering, her thumb extended in a desperate attempt to flag down a ride. Aaron hesitated. Every instinct told him to keep going, but something about her posture, the way she looked so fragile, so real, made him slow down. He pulled onto the shoulder and lowered the passenger window slightly. "Hey," he shouted over the wind. "You okay? Where are you headed?" The woman turned toward him. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, as though she'd been crying for hours. Her voice was barely audible above the storm. "Please, can you take me home? Just to the cemetery outside Tillamook." Aaron frowned. "The cemetery? You sure that's where you need to go?" She nodded quickly, rain dripping from her chin. "It's close. I just need to get home." He unlocked the door. "All right, hop in. You're soaked." She opened the door and slid into the passenger seat without a word. The temperature inside the car dropped immediately, the air dense and cold. Aaron turned up the heat, but the vents only pushed out lukewarm air. The smell of rain and salt water filled the car. "Thank you," she said softly, still staring out the window. "No problem," Aaron replied, trying to sound casual. "Rough night to be out walking." She didn't answer. He glanced at her. She was staring into the darkness outside, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her hair clung to her cheeks, and her skin looked almost translucent in the glow from the dashboard. After a few minutes of silence, Aaron cleared his throat. "So, what were you doing out here? You get stuck or something?" Her voice came out flat. "I was waiting for someone. But he never came back." Aaron frowned. "I'm sorry to hear that. You got family nearby?" She shook her head slowly. "Not anymore." The windshield fogged despite the fan blowing full speed. Aaron wiped a circle clear with his hand and kept driving. The rain intensified, hammering against the roof like gravel. The road wound through forest now, the trees leaning over the asphalt, their branches twitching in the wind. The woman spoke again, so quietly he almost didn't catch it. "You're kind to stop. Most people don't. They just drive past." Aaron smiled faintly. "Well, I'm a paramedic. It's kind of in my nature to help people." She turned to look at him then. Her eyes were dark and distant, but there was something unreadable in them, gratitude mixed with sorrow. You can't help everyone. Her tone sent a chill through him. I try, he said. It's part of the job. They drove in silence for another 10 minutes before she whispered, slow down. It's here. He eased off the gas. The road opened onto a clearing where the storm seemed to thin slightly. A rusted iron gate stood on the right, half hidden by trees. A sign above it read, Tillamook Memorial Cemetery. Aaron pulled over, glancing at her. You sure this is it? She nodded. Yes. Thank you for bringing me home. He forced a smile. You got someone coming to meet you here? She turned toward him again, her expression calm. No. I've been waiting a long time. Aaron's hand tightened on the steering wheel. Listen, I can give you a ride into town if you want. There's a motel about. But she was already opening the door. Wait, he said quickly. At least take my jacket. You'll freeze out there. She paused, looking at him for a long moment. You're kind, she repeated softly. But I don't get cold anymore. Before he could respond, she stepped out into the rain and closed the door. The sound of her footsteps vanished almost immediately under the roar of the storm. Aaron sat there for a moment, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He turned off the wipers and peered through the windshield. She was gone. The cemetery gate stood still, the path beyond swallowed by fog. He sighed and stepped out, pulling his hood up. Hey, he shouted. You forgot your scarf. No answer. He walked toward the gate, his shoes sinking into the mud. The cemetery beyond was silent. Rain fell in sheets, splashing against the gravestones that jutted out of the ground like broken teeth. He moved his flashlight around, nothing. Then the beam stopped on something near the first row of graves. A white coat. Draped neatly over a headstone. Aaron froze. He walked closer, his breath visible in the cold air. The stone was old and worn, covered in moss. The name was barely readable beneath the grime, Emily Carter, 1988 to 2015. Beloved daughter. His flashlight trembled. The coat was identical to the one she'd been wearing. He stumbled backward, heart racing. The rain seemed to fade, replaced by a faint whisper, soft and distant. Thank you for taking me home. He turned toward the sound, nothing but the wind through the trees. The coat slid slowly off the gravestone and fell into the mud. Aaron ran back to the car and slammed the door shut, locking it instinctively. His seat was wet where she'd sat, but not with rain. The fabric was cold, like melting ice. He started the engine and pulled away, tires splashing through puddles. The road blurred in front of him, but he didn't care. He just needed distance between himself and that place. When he finally reached a gas station 30 miles later, he parked under the bright fluorescent lights and sat trembling behind the wheel. His reflection in the side mirror looked pale and exhausted. Then he noticed something on the dashboard. A small silver hairpin. Shaped like a cross. He hadn't seen her wearing it, but it was still damp, with the same faint scent of rain and sea salt that had filled the car. Aaron left the pin at the counter when he paid for coffee. The clerk asked if it belonged to him, but he just shook his head. No, he said quietly. It's for someone who already got home. He never drove that coastal highway again, even when his work required it. But every February, when the rain returns and the sea mist rolls in from the cliffs, he sometimes dreams of the road, and the faint figure in white, standing by the guardrail, waiting for someone kind enough to stop. The end. The rest stop that wasn't there, West Virginia. It happened in early March of 2018, on Interstate 64, about 20 miles west of Charleston, West Virginia. The night was cold and silent, with fog pooling thick between the hills. The asphalt glistened beneath the headlights, slick with mist. The interstate was nearly empty, just the sound of tires cutting through damp air. Mark and Diane Peterson were driving back home to Virginia after visiting Diane's parents near Lexington. It was past midnight, and both were exhausted. Mark had been at the wheel for hours. Diane sat in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window, half asleep. The couple had been married 12 years, and long drives like this were nothing new. But that night, the quiet felt heavier than usual. Around 1:15 a.m., Diane stirred. "How far till the next rest stop?" she murmured. "Mark checked the GPS, says 20 miles, but that's not right, it should have shown up by now." "Let's pull over soon," she said softly. "I need to stretch my legs." 5 minutes later, through the haze, Mark saw the faint outline of a blue highway sign, "Rest Area, 1 mile." He exhaled in relief. There we go. 1 more mile. They followed the exit ramp into a clearing surrounded by tall pines. The fog thickened as they drove in. A small concrete building stood at the center, its lights glowing dimly yellow. A couple of vending machines buzzed quietly near the entrance. The place looked dated, like something built in the 70s and never renovated. Mark parked near the building. Finally. He stepped out first, breathing in the damp air. The forest around them was silent, too silent. Not even crickets. He shrugged it off. Diane grabbed her purse and followed him inside. The rest stop's interior was old but clean. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally. A maintenance cart stood near the corner, and a wet floor sign leaned against the tiled wall. Inside the women's restroom, Diane washed her hands, glancing at the mirror. The reflection flickered slightly, just a trick of the light, she thought. But when she looked again, for a fraction of a second, she saw someone standing behind her. A woman, dressed in pale gray, her face unreadable. Diane spun around. The restroom was empty. Only the faint hum of the light remained. She shook her head and dried her hands. "You're just tired," she whispered to herself. Meanwhile, Mark had gone to the vending machines. The coin slot was jammed. As he turned away, he noticed a man sitting on one of the benches near the entrance, tall, wearing a brown jacket, hands clasped, staring straight ahead. "Hey," Mark said politely. "Quiet night, huh?" The man didn't answer. He didn't even blink. Mark frowned. "You all right, buddy?" "Nothing." The man's chest didn't seem to move, no sign of breathing. Before Mark could step closer, Diane called out from behind him. "Mark, ready to go?" He turned, startled. "Yeah. Let's get moving." When he looked back toward the bench, the man was gone. The seat was empty. They hurried to the car. As they drove out of the rest area, Diane said quietly, "That place gives me chills." "Did you notice the smell?" "Like smoke." "Yeah," Mark said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Let's just get back to the highway." But when they reached the ramp, something didn't make sense. The sign they'd seen before, the one that said "Rest Area, 1 mile," was gone. Instead, there was only a mile marker, 212. No exit, no sign, no trace of a rest area. Mark slowed down, looking in the rearview mirror. The fog was still there, but the clearing they'd come from, the lights, the building, had vanished. Only trees and darkness. "Wait," Diane whispered. "That can't be right. We just stopped there." Mark didn't answer. His hands gripped the wheel tightly. They drove in silence until they reached the next gas station 20 minutes later. Inside, the clerk, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, looked up as they walked in. "Evenin'. You folks look spooked." Mark forced a laugh. "We just stopped at that rest area back near mile 212. Strange place. Looked old as hell." The clerk stared at him. "There's no rest stop near 212. Mark frowned. "Sure there is. Big concrete building, couple of vending machines, bench near the door." The man shook his head. "No, sir. That place burned down in '89. Electrical fire. Killed 2 maintenance workers. They never rebuilt it." The words hit Mark like a punch. "You're saying it's gone?" "Been gone 30 years, the clerk said. "Sometimes truckers swear they see lights there, but it's just fog playing tricks." Diane whispered. We went inside. There were lights, machines, everything. The clerk's face went pale. Ma'am, if you went in there, you need to pray you didn't bring anything out. They left without another word. The rain started as soon as they got back on the highway, hard, pounding sheets that forced Mark to slow down. The wipers squealed uselessly across the glass. At mile 218, Diane gasped. Mark, look! On the right shoulder, barely visible through the storm, stood two figures, wearing janitor uniforms, illuminated by the headlights. Their faces were dark with soot, their eyes hollow. They stood side by side, watching as the car passed. Mark's foot slammed the gas pedal. The car surged forward. Neither of them spoke for the next 10 miles. When they finally reached home at dawn, Diane went straight to the bathroom to wash her hands again. She froze when she looked in the mirror. The edges were smudged with gray streaks, as if someone had touched the glass with burned fingers. Mark found his jacket in the car, still damp from the fog. The sleeve smelled faintly of smoke. Inside the pocket, he discovered something small and cold, a tarnished key with the words Rest Area Supply Room engraved on it. He locked it in a drawer and never spoke of it again. A few weeks later, out of curiosity, Mark checked old highway maps online. There it was, a rest area once stood at mile 212. Closed permanently in 1989 after a fatal fire caused by faulty wiring. 2 workers were trapped inside. Their names were never released. That night, Mark dreamed of driving through the fog again. The same ramp. The same glow of yellow light in the distance. A shadow in a brown jacket sitting on a bench, staring ahead. When he woke, he could still smell smoke. The end. The truck that followed us, Route 19, Pennsylvania. It happened in October of 2020, on Route 19 between Pittsburgh and Erie, Pennsylvania. The air was cold enough that breath fogged inside the car, and the last of the autumn leaves skittered across the asphalt. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the sky had that heavy, metallic stillness that comes before rain. Ethan Ross and his friend Kevin were heading home from a weekend camping trip near Moraine State Park. It was Sunday night, close to midnight, and the road was mostly empty. The only sound inside the car was the low rumble of the engine and the hum of a country radio station fading in and out of static. They were 20 minutes south of Meadville when Kevin said quietly, "We're almost out of gas." Ethan glanced at the gauge. "We'll make it to the next town." A few minutes later, the first drops of rain began to fall, slow, heavy, deliberate. The wipers squeaked across the glass. Then, through the mist, they saw headlights appear behind them. At first, it was comforting, another traveler on the lonely stretch of highway. The lights stayed steady for a few minutes, keeping a fair distance. But then the vehicle drew closer. Too close. The beams flooded the inside of their car, so bright that the rearview mirror became useless. Kevin frowned. "What's his problem?" Ethan squinted at the mirror. "Probably just wants to pass." He slowed down slightly, moving toward the shoulder. But the truck didn't pass. It matched their speed exactly. The rain thickened, turning into a downpour. The road curved sharply, cutting through the trees. Every time Ethan turned the wheel, the truck followed, its headlights unwavering. Kevin turned in his seat, trying to see the driver. It's a black semi. No logos, no trailer lights. Just 2 high beams. Ethan felt a chill crawl up his neck. Maybe a long-haul driver. They get weird out here. Kevin muttered, then why doesn't he pass? The rain hammered harder. The road dipped and rose through rolling hills. Every time they lost sight of the truck for a second, over a hill or around a curve, the lights would reappear immediately, right behind them, perfectly aligned. 15 minutes passed like that. No change. Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. This isn't normal. Kevin nodded. Slow down. Let's see what he does. Ethan eased off the gas. The truck slowed, too. He accelerated. The truck matched him again, never more than 30 feet behind. Kevin's voice broke the silence. He's messing with us. Ethan's mind raced. No, something's off. Look at the lights. They're too high, like the truck's bigger than it should be. Kevin leaned closer to the window, squinting through the rain. There's no reflection on the road, he whispered. The lights aren't hitting the pavement. Ethan's stomach dropped. What? Kevin turned toward him, pale. I'm serious. They're just hanging there. The highway curved again. When they came out of the bend, the truck was gone. Ethan exhaled shakily. Finally. Kevin twisted in his seat. No, man, look. Far behind them, on the horizon, the lights were still there. Not fading like a vehicle turning off, but blinking in and out of the fog, appearing closer each time, like they were leaping forward. Ethan pressed the accelerator. The speedometer climbed past 80. The road was slick, but he didn't care. He just wanted distance. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had started. The world went quiet. The trees stood still on both sides of the road, black silhouettes against the gray sky. Do you smell that? Kevin asked suddenly. Ethan sniffed. The air inside the car was thick with the scent of diesel, sharp, heavy, unmistakable. Kevin covered his mouth. Where's that coming from? Ethan looked at the gauges. No leaks, no smoke. The smell wasn't from their car. Then, a horn blared. Long, low, and deep, the sound of a truck horn, but warped, distant, and wrong. Ethan's heart pounded. Where is it? Kevin turned around, eyes wide. Behind us. The headlights were back, closer than ever, filling the entire rear window. Ethan could see the faint outline of a massive black grille, but no driver, no cabin details, just darkness. The horn sounded again, vibrating the entire car. Ethan swerved instinctively, nearly hitting the guardrail. Kevin shouted, "Floor it." Ethan slammed the pedal. The tires squealed, water sprang from beneath the car. The truck stayed right on them, no matter how fast they went. Then, as they crested another hill, the road ahead opened onto a wide intersection. A flashing yellow light hung overhead. Ethan blew through it at 90, glancing in the mirror, the truck was gone. Completely gone. He slowed down, trembling. You see that? Kevin didn't answer. He was staring at the back seat. What? Ethan asked. Kevin's voice was shaking. It's wet. The seat, it's soaked. Ethan glanced back. The leather glistened with moisture, as if something had been sitting there dripping water and oil. Neither of them spoke for the next few miles. When they finally reached the next town, they pulled into a gas station and sat in silence, both breathing hard. The attendant, a young man in a rain jacket, walked up to their window. You guys all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Ethan forced a nervous laugh. Funny you say that. Some truck's been tailing us for half an hour. Black cab, no markings. Disappeared near the intersection out there. The attendant frowned. You mean the one before the old quarry? Yeah, Ethan said. The man nodded slowly. There's no trucks running that stretch anymore. Haven't been since the accident. Kevin looked up. What accident? The man leaned closer, lowering his voice. 98, fuel tanker overturned on the curve. Caught fire. Driver didn't make it. Whole section shut down for weeks. Folks say sometimes you can still smell the diesel. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. You're kidding. The man shook his head. We still get calls. People say they see a truck behind them that vanishes before the next town. Kevin whispered, the smell. It was in our car. The attendant looked uneasy now. You better wash that car off. Don't keep driving tonight. They spent the rest of the night at a motel across the street. Neither of them slept. Around 3 a.m., Ethan got up to get water. Through the motel window, he saw the faint glint of headlights reflected in the parking lot, but when he looked again, there was nothing. The next morning, he stepped outside to check the car. The ground beneath it was damp, though it hadn't rained again. There were tire tracks next to his own, huge, heavy ones, the kind only a semi could leave. They ended abruptly at the edge of the lot, disappearing into the asphalt. When Ethan got home, he checked the dash camera. It had been recording the whole drive. He pressed play, scrubbing through the footage. The road, the rain, the curves, all there. But when the headlights should have appeared behind them, the screen stayed black. Only one frame, near the end, caught his breath. For a single second, the camera picked up 2 points of light in the darkness, not white, but a faint, sickly orange, hovering in midair, far too high to be car lights. He deleted the footage the next day, but sometimes, when he drives alone at night, he still catches a glimpse of headlights in his mirror, too bright, too steady, too close, and he smells diesel. He never looks back anymore. The end. The Lost Patrol, Route 2, Montana. It happened in August of 2014, along the empty stretch of U.S. Route 2, somewhere between Shelby and Havre, Montana. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, flat, golden, and silent. It was one of those nights when the wind carried no sound and the stars felt too close, like they were pressing down on the earth. Darren Cole, a 45-year-old truck driver from Idaho, was hauling a shipment of building materials eastbound. He'd been driving since late afternoon, planning to reach Havre before dawn. His CB radio crackled occasionally, but no one else seemed to be on the road. Out there, the next town could be 60 miles away, and the only company came from the hum of the tires and the faint static of country music. At 1:40 a.m., Darren saw lights ahead, faint, small, and low to the ground. He slowed slightly, thinking it might be another truck pulled over. But as he got closer, he realized they were moving, old military headlights, dim and yellow, mounted on what looked like an ancient Jeep convoy. Must be a reenactment or something, he muttered to himself, though it was far too late for that kind of event. There were 4 vehicles in total, all identical, their outlines low and boxy, painted in faded green. They drove perfectly in formation, about 50 yards ahead of him. The strangest part was how quiet they were. No engines, no tire noise, just the faint hiss of wind. Darren flipped on his high beams, expecting to see license plates or insignia, but the glare passed right through them. The vehicles didn't reflect light at all. He reached for his CB and said, "Anyone else eastbound on 2 near Shelby? You seeing this?" Only static answered. The convoy kept moving, slow and steady. He couldn't make out the drivers. Just the faint outlines of helmets, rigid and unmoving. After a few miles, the lead Jeep's brake lights flashed once. The whole line stopped dead in the middle of the highway. Darren cursed under his breath and pulled to a stop behind them, leaving a good distance. The night was deathly still. He waited, engine idling. No one got out. He honked once. Nothing. He flicked his headlights off and on again, hoping to get some reaction. Still nothing. Then, slowly, the last Jeep in the line began to turn, not onto the shoulder, but directly into the empty field to the right. One by one, the others followed, rolling silently into the tall grass. Darren leaned out the window to watch. The ground out there was uneven, but the Jeeps moved smoothly, their tires leaving no visible tracks. Within seconds, they were gone, swallowed by darkness. The open field stretched for miles, yet their headlights simply faded like candles snuffed out. Darren sat there for a full minute, trying to process what he'd just seen. Finally, he climbed out of the cab, flashlight in hand. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust. He walked to the side of the road where the Jeeps had turned off. The grass was still swaying slightly, as if something had just passed through. But there were no tire marks. He stood in silence, the beam of his flashlight shaking slightly in his hand. Then, somewhere out in the darkness, came a faint metallic sound, the rattle of chains, the creak of a door, and then a man's voice shouting something indistinct. Darren froze. The voice wasn't echoing, it was close. He raised the light, scanning the field. Nothing. Then the air changed. It felt thicker, charged, like before a lightning strike. A low rumble rolled across the plains, but there were no clouds, no storm, just the endless, starless sky. And then he saw them again. Far out in the distance, the 4 jeeps were lined up once more, but now facing him. Their headlights glowed faintly, like dying embers. Between them stood figures, men in uniforms, motionless, their helmets catching what little light there was. He couldn't see their faces. One of them raised an arm, slow and deliberate, as if signaling him to stop. Darren backed away toward the truck. "Nope," he whispered. "Not tonight." He climbed into the cab, slammed the door, and threw the gear into drive. The tires spun on the slick asphalt before gripping. As the truck roared forward, he glanced in the mirror, and his heart stopped. The jeeps were suddenly behind him, impossibly close, their lights burning brighter now, pale yellow, flickering like fire. They moved in perfect formation, closing the gap fast. He pushed the pedal to the floor. The speedometer climbed past 70, 80, 90. The convoy stayed right on his tail, silent, relentless. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't static. A voice, faint and broken, came through the speaker. "Command, position lost, returning to base." Darren's knuckles went white. "Who is this?" he shouted into the mic. "Who's on this channel?" No reply, only the same fragment repeating, softer each time. He drove like that for another 10 miles, heart pounding, headlights slicing through the black. Then, without warning, the convoy's lights blinked out all at once. The road behind him went dark. He slowed, looking in every mirror, straining his ears. Nothing. No engines, no wind, not even the sound of crickets. He drove straight through to Havre without stopping again. At dawn, when the first light broke over the plains, he finally pulled into a diner. The waitress poured him coffee and asked if he was all right. His hands were still shaking. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. Darren gave a nervous laugh. "You could say that. Some kind of old army convoy out there last night. Didn't make a sound." The waitress's smile faded. "Where exactly?" "About halfway between Shelby and Havre. For jeeps, old ones, no plates." She stared at him for a long moment. "My granddad used to talk about them. They called it the Lost Patrol." Darren frowned. "Lost Patrol?" She nodded slowly. "Training unit from the 1940s. Took the wrong road during a snowstorm. All 4 jeeps disappeared in the blizzard. They never found the bodies. Locals say they still drive the route sometimes, trying to find their way back to base." Darren tried to laugh it off. "You're kidding." The waitress shook her head. "Truckers see them once in a while. Always at night, always in silence. If you try to follow, you never find the road again." He didn't touch his coffee after that. Later that morning, as he fueled up before heading out, he noticed something strange on the side of his truck. A streak of mud, no, not mud, dust, smeared across the door in long, thin lines. Embedded in the dirt were the faint impressions of letters. He wiped at it, but the dust was dry, as if it had been there for decades. When he stepped back, he could finally read it. "Second Patrol, 1944. He stared at it for a long time before climbing into the cab. As he merged back onto Route 2, he kept his eyes on the horizon. The plains shimmered in the heat, endless and empty. But as he passed the 10-mile mark from where he'd seen the convoy, he thought he saw movement in the distance, 4 faint lights, lined up perfectly, driving toward the rising sun. He didn't look again. The end. The radio station that shouldn't exist, Alabama Highway 31. It happened in May of 2019, along Highway 31, between Birmingham and Montgomery, Alabama. The road was empty except for the occasional passing truck, and the sky was dark with a low curtain of clouds that threatened rain. The night air was heavy with humidity, thick enough that the smell of pine and asphalt lingered inside the car. Michael Avery, a 34-year-old delivery driver for a logistics company, was driving a company van southbound after a long day of deliveries. It was close to 2 a.m. The GPS had lost signal over an hour ago, and the last exit sign had flashed by miles earlier. He rolled down the window to stay awake, letting the warm wind push through the cab. The road ahead stretched endlessly. No lights. No music. Just the hum of the tires. Bored and half drowsy, Michael reached out and turned the radio dial, searching for something to fill the silence. At first, there was only static, the kind that crackled softly, almost hypnotically. But then, through the noise, came a faint voice. "You're driving south tonight. Stay on the highway. Don't pull over." Michael frowned, turning the volume up. The voice was male, calm, and oddly precise. It sounded like a radio host reading from a script. To the man in the white delivery van approaching mile marker 112, "Keep driving. You're not alone out there." Michael froze. The van was white. He looked at the dashboard clock, 2:03 a.m. He was just past mile marker 111. He laughed nervously. "Okay, that's creepy." He adjusted the dial slightly, thinking maybe it was some local prank broadcast. The voice faded into static, then came back stronger. "You won't see the other car until it's too late. Don't stop." The hairs on his arms stood up. He switched the radio off, heart pounding. The sudden silence inside the van was deafening. Only the sound of the engine remained. For a few minutes, everything was normal again. Then, in the side mirror, he caught a flash of movement, a pair of headlights far behind him. They were small at first, distant. Then they grew brighter. Closer. Michael tightened his grip on the wheel. "Coincidence," he muttered. "Just another car." But the lights didn't behave like a normal car's. They weaved slightly, then lined up perfectly behind him, keeping the exact same distance. Too steady. Too deliberate. He turned the radio back on without thinking. Static filled the cab, and then, as clear as before, the same calm voice returned. "Don't look in the mirror anymore. Just drive." Michael's mouth went dry. He turned it off again. The headlights behind him flashed once, twice, as if responding. His heart began to race. The road curved left, then right, but the car behind him followed every turn precisely. It didn't fall back, didn't overtake, didn't drift. Just followed. After 5 minutes, the lights disappeared completely. Michael exhaled shakily, trying to calm down. "See? Nothing. Just the radio messing with me." Then, his own radio clicked back on by itself. The voice whispered, almost gently now, "Don't lie to yourself, Michael. You know it's still there." He swerved, panic surging through him. Who the hell is this? No answer. Just the low hum of static. Then, another sound, faint but distinct. Breathing. Someone breathing slowly, right through the speakers. Michael slammed the radio button off again. His hands were slick with sweat. The headlights returned, closer this time, filling the rear window with blinding light. He couldn't see the car, only the glare. It felt too low for a truck, too high for a sedan. He pressed the accelerator. The van surged forward, engine whining. 90. 95. Still the lights followed. The voice returned, even though the radio was off. It came through the speakers anyway. "You're going too fast, Michael. You'll miss the turn." He shouted, "What turn?" Silence. Then, the GPS, which had been dead for hours, came back to life. Its screen flickered, and a metallic voice said, "In 200 feet, turn right." Michael looked ahead, there was no turn. Just highway and darkness. He shouted, "There's no road." But the headlights behind him flared brighter, so bright they painted his dashboard white. Instinct took over. He jerked the wheel hard to the right. The van lurched violently. Gravel sprayed up from the shoulder as he skidded onto a narrow service road he hadn't noticed before. The headlights behind him vanished instantly. Michael braked hard, heart hammering, chest tight. The van came to a stop in the middle of the empty road. His hands shook as he reached for his phone. No signal. The rain started then, sudden, heavy, relentless. It pounded on the roof like 1,000 small fists. He sat there breathing heavily, trying to gather himself. The radio was off. The GPS screen was dark again. Nothing but the rain. Then, from the speakers, a crackle. "You shouldn't have turned." He looked around wildly. "Who are you?" No response. "You're off the map now." The engine sputtered and died. The dashboard lights dimmed one by one until the van was completely dark. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating a small building up ahead, a concrete structure with an old antenna on the roof. A faded sign above the door read, WALB 97.3 FM. Michael's stomach twisted. The call letters were the same as the station he'd been tuned to. He stepped out of the van, rain soaking through his clothes instantly. The air felt charged, almost electric. He walked toward the building, drawn by some instinct he couldn't explain. The front door hung slightly open. Inside, the faint glow of a single red-on-air light flickered. He stepped inside. The room smelled of dust and mold. Old broadcasting equipment lined the walls, analog dials, tape reels, a cracked microphone. A chair sat in front of the console, turned away from him. Lightning flashed again through the window, lighting up the room, and in that instant, he saw the figure sitting in the chair. A man in a dark suit, thin, motionless. "Hello?" Michael said, his voice trembling. The man didn't move. Michael took a step closer, reaching out to touch his shoulder. The body turned on its own, the chair spinning slightly. What he saw made him stagger backward. The man's skin was gray and dry, his eyes sunken deep into his skull. The microphone cable was wrapped tightly around his throat. The radio console crackled to life. The same calm voice filled the room, but now it was coming from the dead man's microphone. "Thank you for tuning in, Michael. That concludes tonight's broadcast." Michael stumbled toward the door, but the red-on-air light flared brighter, bathing the room in crimson. The door slammed shut. The voice whispered again, now right behind him. "Drive safely." He turned, no one there. The light flickered once more and went out completely. When Michael came to, it was daylight. He was sitting behind the wheel of the van, parked on the shoulder of Highway 31. The rain was gone, and the road was dry. His watch read 9:17 a.m. The van's engine started normally. The radio was silent. The motel with one guest, Route 9, New Jersey. It happened in late September of 2022, along Route 9, near Barnegat Township, New Jersey. The night was cold for early autumn, the kind of damp chill that crept in through the seams of a car. The rain had been falling since dusk, steady and cold, turning the highway into a ribbon of shining black glass. David Harper, a 39-year-old insurance adjuster, was driving back from a long day of field visits along the coast. He was supposed to reach Atlantic City by midnight, but fatigue had set in, and the rain made every mile feel longer. His eyes were dry, his coffee gone cold, and the monotony of the wipers clicking back and forth lulled him close to sleep. Around 11:45 p.m., he decided to stop for the night. He hadn't seen another car in 15 minutes, and his GPS showed no major hotels nearby, just an icon labeled Pine Rest Motel. It wasn't ideal, but he was too tired to keep driving. He took the next exit, following a narrow service road lined with pines. After a few minutes, a dim neon sign appeared through the rain, Pine Rest Motel, vacancy. The building looked small, maybe 10 rooms total, with a flickering porch light and a gravel lot. David parked near the office, grabbed his briefcase, and stepped into the rain. The air smelled of pine sap and something faintly metallic, like rust. Inside, the office was dimly lit, with yellow wallpaper curling at the edges and a dusty bell on the counter. He rang it once. A few seconds later, a man emerged from the back room, tall, thin, dressed in an old-fashioned gray vest and white shirt. His face was pale and drawn, his smile polite but strange, like someone trying to remember how to look friendly. "Evening," the man said quietly. "You need a room?" "Yeah," David replied. "Just for the night." The clerk nodded and pulled a key from a wooden rack behind him. Each hook was labeled with a number written by hand on masking tape. The man handed him room 6. "Cash only," the clerk said. David hesitated, then shrugged. He paid $40 and signed a ledger that looked decades old. The clerk's handwriting filled the pages, the same name repeated again and again, M. Crane, manager. "Room's around the corner," the man said. "Heat's on. Breakfast at 6. "Thanks," David said, pocketing the key. The metal tag was cold in his hand, the number barely visible through years of wear. He walked down the corridor outside, rain dripping from the roof. The motel was eerily quiet, no other cars, no lights in the windows, just the distant sound of water running through the gutters. Room 6 was at the end of the row. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and damp wood. A single lamp cast weak light over an old bed, a desk, and a small television bolted to the wall. He tossed his briefcase onto the chair, kicked off his shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed. The heater hummed softly in the corner. As he leaned back, he noticed something odd, the sound of footsteps above him. Slow, deliberate. But the motel was a one-story building. He frowned, listening. The footsteps continued for a few seconds, then stopped. He brushed it off, assuming maybe the pipes or the heater were making noise. He turned on the TV, flipping through static-filled channels until one came through faintly, an old news broadcast, the kind filmed on grainy tape. The anchor was talking about a motel fire along Route 9 that had claimed 7 lives. The footage showed a small building, blackened and smoking. For a moment, David thought it looked familiar. The channel flickered, then went dark. He laughed nervously. Great. Probably a local rerun or something. He got up to check the window. Rain streaked the glass. The parking lot outside was empty, except for one car parked near the office. His car. No one else's. He turned away, ready to sleep. But then came a knock. 3 soft knocks. He froze. "Yeah," he called out. "Who's there?" No answer. He opened the door slightly and looked out. The walkway was empty. Just rain and the buzzing of the neon sign in the distance. He shut the door and locked it. "Probably the wind," he muttered. 10 minutes later, as he began to drift off, he heard the footsteps again. This time, they were closer, above him, then along the wall behind the bed, slow and steady. He sat up, his pulse quickening. "Hello?" Silence. Then, faintly, from the other side of the wall, a woman's voice. Soft, trembling. "Help me." David froze. The voice came again, clearer this time, right through the thin plaster. "Please, help me." He pressed his ear to the wall. "Who's there? Are you okay?" "Nothing." He stepped outside, barefoot, rain soaking his shirt within seconds. He knocked on the door to the next room, room 5. No answer. The window was dark. He tried room 7. Same thing. He turned toward the office. The light inside was still on. He hurried across the lot, water splashing underfoot. Inside, the clerk was gone. The ledger still lay open on the counter. David flipped through the pages again, but the ink looked smeared and faded, as if it had been written years ago. The last entry was dated September 29, 1984. The name written on that line was his own. His breath caught in his throat. He stumbled backward, heart pounding. Behind the counter, a door was slightly ajar. Inside, he could see an old rotary phone on the wall, its cord dangling, and a corkboard covered with yellowed newspaper clippings. He stepped closer. The headlines made his blood run cold. 7 killed in Route 9 motel fire. Cause unknown, guests trapped in rooms. Owner missing, presumed dead. Below the articles were black and white photos of the motel, identical to the one he was standing in, down to the last detail. The fire had gutted it completely. Lightning flashed outside, and for a split second, he saw movement in the reflection of the office window, the clerk, standing behind him, his expression blank. David spun around. The office was empty. He ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. He yanked the handle again and again until it finally gave way, throwing him out into the storm. The parking lot lights flickered violently. The motel looked different now, charred, blackened, the paint stripped away. The neon sign was half broken, its letters hanging loose. Through the rain, the rooms looked abandoned, windows shattered, doors missing. He turned toward his car, it was gone. Every breath came out in white clouds. The air smelled of smoke. From somewhere behind him came the sound of voices, faint, echoing, overlapping. Men, women, children. Whispering his name. He stumbled backward toward the trees. No, no, no. A single light flickered in one of the burned rooms, room 6. Inside, through the cracked window, he could see someone standing. A silhouette, motionless. It looked like him. Then the light went out. When he woke, he was sitting in his car, parked on the shoulder of Route 9. The rain had stopped. His watch read 3:17 a.m. He looked around. No sign of the motel. Just trees and darkness. At dawn, still shaken, he stopped at a diner and asked the waitress about the Pine Rest Motel. Her face paled. "Sweetheart," she said quietly, "that place burned down almost 40 years ago. Everyone in it died." David didn't answer. He just nodded and left. Later, when he got home, he checked his briefcase. Inside, sitting on top of his paperwork, was the metal key, room 6, still damp, with soot along the edges. The end. The road that loops back, Colorado mountains. It happened in late November of 2018, deep in the Colorado Rockies, along a narrow mountain highway that twisted between dense pine forests and steep cliffs. The night air was thin and sharp, and snow had just begun to fall, the kind that drifted silently, covering everything in white before anyone noticed. Eric Dawson, a 41-year-old wildlife photographer, was driving home from a week-long assignment near Telluride. His SUV was packed with camera gear and sleeping bags, and the back seat was cluttered with coffee cups and empty snack wrappers. The road was deserted. His phone had no service for the past hour, and the GPS screen had frozen on the same spot miles back. By 10:30 p.m., he was running low on gas and patience. He'd expected to hit the next town by now, but all he'd seen were trees and endless switchbacks. The snow thickened. The high beams caught swirling flakes that looked like static on an old TV screen. The road was slippery, the guardrails buried under fresh snow. He slowed down to 40. Then he saw it, a reflective green sign half covered in frost, Ridgeway Pass, 7 miles. Finally, he muttered. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and kept going. The road wound up and around, cutting through the forest. The snowfall eased slightly, and the moon broke through the clouds, lighting the peaks in ghostly silver. After about 15 minutes, another sign appeared through the haze. Ridgeway Pass, 7 miles. Eric frowned. That's not right. He glanced at his odometer. He'd driven over 8 miles since the last sign. Maybe there was another marker ahead, or maybe he'd misread it. He kept driving. The forest grew denser, the trees pressing closer to the road. The headlights illuminated a rusted guardrail and a curved sign shaped like an arrow. The snow on the branches sparkled faintly, hypnotically. When the road straightened again, he saw something that made his stomach drop. The same sign. Ridgeway Pass, 7 miles. He slowed to a crawl, heart pounding. The snow beside the road looked exactly the same as before, the same broken branch, the same dark stump near the shoulder. He pulled over, rolled down the window, and listened. The wind was still. No other cars. No sounds except the faint hiss of falling snow. He shut off the engine. For a moment, the silence was total. Then, faintly, from somewhere far down the road, came the sound of an engine. He turned the key again. The headlights flicked back on. Through the falling snow, he could see another set of lights approaching from behind, dim, yellow, moving slowly. Finally, he thought, someone else. He waited, expecting the car to pass. But the lights kept their distance, neither closing in nor falling back. After a minute, he put the car in gear and started forward again. The lights followed. He drove faster, checking the mirror. The lights stayed exactly the same distance away, steady, unwavering. Then he realized something impossible. They weren't reflecting off the snow. No glare. No shine on the wet asphalt. Just two glowing circles hanging in the dark. His chest tightened. He pressed the gas harder. The road twisted again, climbing higher into the mountains. His tires crunched through fresh snow, leaving deep tracks. After another 5 minutes, the lights behind him vanished. He exhaled, gripping the wheel. Just the fog. Just tricks of light. But when he came around the next bend, his headlights hit something that made his skin crawl. Tire tracks. Fresh ones. The exact same pattern as his, same width, same tread. They led ahead into the curve, perfectly matching his path. He pulled over and got out, crunching through the snow to look. The tracks went on for miles, fading into the dark. He got back in the car and started driving again, faster now, hands trembling. After another 15 minutes, his fuel light came on. He cursed under his breath. Come on, come on. Then he saw lights up ahead, faint but real. Relief flooded through him. Maybe a cabin, maybe a gas station. He drove closer. A small building stood at the side of the road, wooden, old, half buried in snow. A single lamp glowed in the window. A faded sign read Ridgeway Pass Ranger Station. He pulled in, leaving the engine running. Snow crunched under his boots as he ran to the door. Inside, the air smelled of dust and cold wood. The lights flickered weakly from an old generator in the corner. On the wall hung a map of the area, yellowed and torn. He brushed snow from his jacket and called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. He stepped closer to the map. It showed Highway 550 winding through the mountains, the same road he'd been on. But there was something strange. Near the spot marked Ridgeway Pass, a hand-drawn circle had been added in red ink. Next to it, in faded writing, someone had scrawled, "Do not drive after dark." Eric's stomach turned. Then, from outside, came the sound of his own car engine revving. He froze. He ran to the door and stepped out. His SUV headlights were still on, the driver's door wide open, and sitting behind the wheel was a man. At least, it looked like one. Same jacket. Same hair. Same face. Himself. The figure in the driver's seat turned its head slowly toward him. Its eyes caught the light, blank and pale, like glass. Eric stumbled backward into the snow, heart pounding. The engine roared louder, then cut off abruptly. The headlights went dark. He ran back inside, slamming the door. His breath came in sharp bursts. The generator sputtered, then went silent. Darkness swallowed the room. For a long moment, there was nothing. No sound but his heartbeat. Then, from outside, the crunch of footsteps in the snow. Slow. Deliberate. Coming toward the door. He grabbed a chair and wedged it under the handle. The footsteps stopped just outside. A low voice, his own voice, spoke through the wood. "You're going the wrong way." The door shuddered once, then went still. He stayed there for what felt like hours, frozen, waiting. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, he finally dared to move. The world outside was quiet again, the snowfall light and steady. His SUV sat exactly where he'd left it, untouched. No footprints. No second set of tire tracks. He drove in silence. The morning sun broke through the clouds, washing the mountains in gold. The GPS blinked back to life, showing him less than 5 miles from Ridgway Pass. He glanced at the clock. It read 10:47 p.m. He blinked. That couldn't be right. The sun was rising. But the dashboard clock wouldn't change. As he crested the final hill, his relief turned to terror. There, standing by the roadside, was a green sign dusted with snow. Ridgway Pass, 7 miles. He hit the brakes, but the car kept rolling. His hands shook violently. He turned the wheel around, heading back the way he'd come, but after 10 minutes of driving, the same sign appeared again. Ridgway Pass, 7 miles. When rescuers eventually found his SUV 2 days later, it was parked neatly on the shoulder of Route 550. The headlights were on, the engine off, the driver's seat empty. In the snow behind it were hundreds of footprints circling the car, all the same size. Locals still say that sometimes, on cold November nights, drivers who take that road find themselves looping endlessly between two identical signs, watching their own headlights appear in the distance.